Hello and welcome to the Ask the Experts panel. We're so glad that you can be with us here today. And I want to again thank Dr. Bonnie Hennig-Trestman for her last session. And I think we've got a great panel here that is available to answer your questions. If your questions aren't able, if there's not time to answer your questions live, they will answer the questions and put it up on the HD Hive bulletin board, which is on the HD Reach website. But let me start by introducing our panel. We have Dr. Myriam Sollmon, who is a neuropsychologist practicing with Prisma Health in Columbia, South Carolina. Dr. Sollmon is also a member of the HD Reach Education Conference Steering Committee. Dr. Claudia Testa is a professor in the Department of Neurology at Virginia Commonwealth University and serves as the medical director for the VCU Parkinson's and Movement Disorders Center. She's the founding director of the Huntington's Disease Program and HDSA Center of Excellence at VCU. Dr. Mary Edmondson is a psychiatrist, an internist, and a founder of HD Reach. In addition to being the chair of the Medical Advisory Board for HD Reach, she is also on the board of the Huntington Study Group. And Dr. Bonnie Hennig-Trestman has a doctorate of social work, has her own consulting group, is the director of the Carilion Clinic HD program, and an assistant professor at the Virginia Tech School of Medicine. She is also the special programs manager at HD Reach. And I am Debbie Fox Davis. I'm the executive director of HD Reach, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. So let me start by asking the first question to Dr. Testa. Dr. Testa, how do you get someone treatment if a caregiver is not supportive?
That's a pretty broad question. I think it's highly dependent upon what kind of treatment we're talking about, and what the objections are. So in my experience, both with Huntington's disease families and within my own extended family, that kind of question can come up when the caregiver has some skepticism about a proposed treatment, and doesn't feel like it's in the best interest of the patient, even if the care team disagrees. I have a Parkinson's disease patient who's very interested, for example, since Dr. Bonnie Hennig-Trestman just covered this, in getting a COVID-19 vaccine, and their caregiver is very skeptical about whether or not that's a good idea for them. So we're trying to have conversations about where does that skepticism come from, and can we honor the patient themselves and what they want. That can be a completely different conversation if the hesitation is about cost, if the hesitation is just about a very different viewpoint on what the caregiver thinks. Sometimes the care team is talking about how a palliative care or comfort care option really seems to honor what the patient and family has been saying like they want and is the best form of care for somebody, but the caregiver is reluctant to go that way because they're not hearing the message of this is honoring the best form of care for the person, and instead they're hearing a message of failure or giving up. So I think to try to address a broad question broadly, the basic concepts are to try to figure out what is the holdup. My mother-in-law refused a lot of treatment for my father-in-law's dementia because she felt like it would make his dementia worse if we talked to him about dementia. So therefore taking him to medical appointments about dementia was off the table. So working out like what is the care recommendation and what is the source of hesitancy or skepticism or disagreement, and how can we move forward. And if the care team really feels like a caregiver is entrenched in a direction that's really not good for the patient, then I'm usually getting social work involved or trying to identify either other family members or a community member that the caregiver may have a tighter bond with or more trust in than the care team, to see if we can get more communication going.
Great. It sounds like it may really take a team effort to move things forward. I'd like to ask the next question to Dr. Edmondson. Can you tell us what is the relationship between HD and alcohol abuse?
There we go. So the relationship with alcohol and Huntington's disease um, is sort of straightforward. So people use alcohol for a lot of different reasons. They use it for socialization, to celebrate big events like the holidays or weddings or other things, parties, etc. Some people use alcohol to reduce anxiety. Some people use alcohol to numb emotional pain. Um, so, uh, Alcohol is pretty ubiquitous in our culture, and it's a legal drug. Um, so, and for some people, it's a sign of freedom or adulthood, I guess. Your ability to handle yourself. Unfortunately, with Huntington's disease, it's like adding two problems that are very similar together. So, people with Huntington's disease have problems with disinhibition already, which means that you have trouble stopping yourself from doing things that are not in your best interest. You might be more likely to, take risks. You might be more likely to say something you didn't mean otherwise. So, and that's the same thing that happens with alcohol. So you're taking somebody who already has a biologically induced disinhibition and adding more disinhibition on top of that. And so, behaviors that are not in your best interest can occur. But probably the most important relationship between alcohol and Huntington's disease is that there is some evidence that alcohol increases progression of disease, which means that, Dr. Finan was talking about how people lose 1 point per year with Huntington's disease. So it would be losing more than 1 point per year. Now, those were some small studies, but still pretty provoking, or they sort of provoke the idea that the combination of alcohol and Huntington's disease is a bad one. It also increases suicidality, or increases the chance that someone might act on suicidal behavior. So, in general, alcohol is just not a good combination with Huntington's disease.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. The next question is for Dr. Sollmon. How does a family know when it's time for the HD patient to stop driving an automobile?
That's a great question, and I applaud the person who took the time to think about the safety of their loved ones and the community. Driving is a very complex skill, and there's unfortunately no very good test for driving safety. Typically, when a person thinks about their own ability to drive, they're thinking about, do I know how to operate the vehicle? Do I know how to get from one place to another? But driving is so much more than that. It involves reacting to the children that might run out into the road, or to the drunk driver that might be operating another vehicle, and so on and so forth. And so, usually what I tell people is that your driving safety may decline before you're aware of it. The best gauge as a rule of thumb for driving safety is if you don't feel comfortable riding in the car with that person without saying anything, without correcting them, if they're going too slow or too fast or leaving their lanes, then it's time to stop driving. And this becomes an unfortunately huge debate within families and even between healthcare professionals and their patients, because driving represents freedom for a lot of people. And so it can be an incredibly adversarial conversation or difficult conversation to have with family members. What you can do is you can turn that question over to your physicians, who can lead you to resources for driving assessments. Some states offer that through the Department of Motor Vehicles. Other universities have driving rehabilitation testers and instructors, like we have that here at the University of South Carolina. that can do a formal on-the-road evaluation for you. And that's really the safest thing.
Great, thank you that's a question that I know a lot of people have on their mind. So Dr. Bonnie, this next question is going to be for you. Can you tell us, how do you prepare your kids when they are about to be tested? And I don't know if the questioner meant when the kids are about to be tested or the person themselves was about to be tested.
Yeah, and when we did get some of these questions beforehand, so I'm going to make assumptions. First of all, there is one of my talks called "Talking to Kids About Huntington's Disease," which you can Google. There are many times I presented this, so I believe you can just on YouTube or just Google "Talking to Kids About Huntington's Disease" because we only have a short amount of time. I'm also going to make the assumption that this person knows that children are people who want to get tested, who are at risk, who want to get tested, need to be 18 years or older because then they have consent to do so. That's very different again than juvenile onset, so we're not going to go there right now. But I'm going to make a couple of assumptions in terms of this. I love the fact that this person is being proactive and trying to prepare, which I think is great. And I'm also going to guess that HD in this family is openly discussed. So there are some families who will openly talk to their children to say, I'm going to be tested for this disease that we've talked about that's in our family. And then they will say, I will keep you posted every step of the way. And then there are some families who decide to go through this. And even though HD is openly discussed, they wait until after the results so that they can decide when they're going to tell the children. And what I can tell you is that the families who do wait, there is this extra burden of when is it the right time to tell them. And I think that that's can be an added burden that sometimes keeps getting put off because there's never a really good time. So if you are working with your family and you're able to say, I'm going to keep you posted every step of the way, and know that, the information I get is the information I will give to you, and that there are going to be times that it's going to feel scary and I'm going to be worried, but we can talk together, because not talking about it, even though it is scary, doesn't make this go away. So again, I think it's a really short answer, but when you do talk together, and I do this in my practice as well as probably most of the speakers on here do, is I do two things. Is I want to make sure at the end of a conversation that I leave somebody with hope. We heard about a couple of the clinical trials that are happening right now. There are a lot of clinical trials that are happening now and in the future that we've heard about from the CHDI conference, and that are happening, that we've heard of from other outlets as well. So I want to let people know that there's hope for the future. There are hope in terms of clinical trials. And I also want to connect people to resources. So when you're talking about kids, and there are organizations that focus specifically on this, like the Huntington's Disease Youth Organization, HDYO, that does work with children who, and young adults as well. So that's a really good resource of HDYO, as well as the Huntington's Disease Society of America, HDSA, does have the National Youth Alliance. So please do connect with them, because then you won't feel alone and you will have a toolbox of resources.
Thank you, Dr. Bonnie. It sounds like there are a lot of resources and a lot of people out there that can help with this. It's not easy, but I think there's plenty of resources to help people do a better job with communications. So Dr. Testa, I hope you're here with us. I saw you were having a little bit of internet issues, but it looks like you're back. This next question is for you. Medications seem to impact more heavily with progression of illness. How do families manage this for their loved ones when communicating with medical professionals?
So that's a great question. I think a lot of medical professionals are used to dealing with some of the common symptoms within Huntington's disease, whether that's depression or involuntary movements. But at the same time, a lot of professionals are much more accustomed to treating things that are a little more static. So someone who has a major depressive disorder, and that's their one medical diagnosis, and that's the key thing that they're dealing with, not within Huntington's disease, or someone who has a different form of movement disorders, like tardive dyskinesia, which also causes a lot of wiggly involuntary movements from a past drug exposure. And the big difference is that with Huntington's disease, currently, we'll get into the drug trials later, but right for now, things change over time. So things change as we age, which is natural, but things also within Huntington's disease change over time as the brain changes and the amount of symptoms changes, and symptoms may come and go. With aging brains of all types, medications tend to have a bigger impact over time. So often the easiest people to talk to are people who have practice that involves a lot of older individuals, because they're used to doing that analysis in all their patients. Is the dose of this what we still need as this person is aging? Or is this symptom still in the forefront, or has it kind of faded back as this person is aging? Those discussions happen a lot sooner with people in Huntington's disease. So reminding yourselves, your family members, and your care providers that Huntington's disease is a dynamic disorder where things change over time, and that every few months or so, it's a good time to think, hey, are the things that were a great idea 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 6 years ago, still a good idea? Or if things changed and we need to dial down doses, or we need to think about completely new interventions to keep up and keep ahead of the disease, so that every day we're maximizing independence and maximizing quality.
Thank you. It sounds like good communication is pretty important in this, and keeping up with what the right medication levels are and what the right medications are. So thank you for that. The next question is for Dr. Sollmon. Do any of the COVID vaccines impact HD wellness? Aside from typical vaccine side effects, is there anything of consequence to monitor? And I know Dr. Bonnie talked about this in her last presentation, but this question is on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that people are talking about COVID. Dr. Bonnie did such a great job of talking about the vaccine and the illness and how it can impact you. What the science is showing about the vaccines is that any adverse effects or risks associated with the vaccines are much, much lower in frequency than acquiring the illness or significant side effects of the illness itself. So I've had COVID twice now myself, and it was a terrible experience both times with some probably life-altering long-term consequences. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. Certainly the easiest thing to do is to get vaccinated so you can be out in the public, exercising and doing the things that are going to help you to keep healthy and strong, to be there for each other, to help each other through this process.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Testa, I know this, Dr. Sung talked about this morning, but could you give us a little more insight or any other insight into the drug trials that were recently stopped, why and what it means?
So let's talk about the WAVE trials first briefly. And we have to, I'm not part of either of those trials. So just like everybody, most everybody else at this conference, I'm working with what's in the public sphere already. But I have to say both clinical trial teams have put an unusually high amount of stuff into the public sphere, which is really, really useful in terms of trying to work out what's going on. And I really applaud their stopped mainly because they felt like they weren't getting a stable signal. There was a lot of variability in what was happening with the biomarkers, and simultaneously they have a new generation, a next generation of their antisense oligonucleotide platforms with different chemistry background, hopefully higher penetration into the brain, stronger medication effect, and it's to a slightly different target, although also allele specific and also targeting mutant Huntington specifically. So the decision was they weren't getting as great a signal and as clear a signal out of their current therapeutics. So they wanted to pull those back and put their resources into their new agent and get that into human trials. They think they're going to get a stronger, more stable signal and that's going to be something that's more likely to carry forward. So I think that reasoning where they're moving to something else in the same category that's a little different, that they're hoping is going to be better, and moving that more quickly into human trials is the basic decision-making process on the Wave side. On the Genentech Roche side, I really think they didn't have any other decision after their presentation at CHDI, where they really laid out as much of their data analysis as they have, and there's, I'm sure, more to come. It was pretty clear when the placebo and the every 16-week treatment group are pretty similar with no big splits over time, and their key treatment group, the every 8-week treatment group, was clearly worse on almost every measure compared to placebo. There's no other choice but to stop, because it means that for reasons that we don't yet understand, the treatment group was doing worse than the placebo group. And so that means they really need to think about what are the root causes of that. They've got a lot of data to go through to try to figure that out, and to use that understanding to both improve their own platform, which they're committed to going forward with, and to, they've really made an amazing commitment to put all that information out into the public sphere as they have it, so that all of the other companies that are developing similar Huntington lowering therapeutics can share in that understanding of what happened with that first trial. So I find it a very challenging place to be. Cognitively, on the one hand, is really, really hoping that this, all of those trials, Genentech and Wave, were going to give us the first therapeutics out in clinical practice. With Wave, I think we're still going forward with the allele specific in a very similar vein. With the Roche Genentech, the hope there is that this is just an incredible amount to learn. I mean, this is really an amazing opportunity that they're going to take that commitment and all of that information from all those participants and the research team and get it out there as rapidly as possible, so that will accelerate how all the other therapeutics in the pipeline get tweaked, get developed, get improved, and pushed forward.
Absolutely, and thank you for highlighting the bright spot of what's happening with these trials, is that they have allowed us to collect a lot more data and to learn a lot more, even though we had disappointing results so far. So Dr. Bani, this next question is for you. Can you tell us about any excellent virtual caregiver classes online?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think this is a great question because it tells me that people are trying to be prepared. So the short answer is definitely yes. There are classes, and actually Dr. Mary Edmondson told you about some caregiving tips that I thought was really, really good. So definitely looking back on that on demand and sharing it with people, I think would be helpful. So some of the caregiving tips in the classes are not specific to Huntington's disease, but I don't think that that really matters. I think a caregiving class can be helpful. And first of all, I want to give total credit to Catherine Sherry, who resourced all of these and was able to find a lot of these references that I believe she's going to be putting up on the chat box as well as in the bulletin board for HD Reach. So they're definitely, the first one is the HDSA downloadable guide, the caregiver's guide, which is not an online class, but it is a whole booklet that has been created, which I think that has a lot of nice tips in it. So I think that that's helpful. Some of the others I think we're going to be the Family Caregiver Alliance, the Center for Volunteer Caregiving. Again, these are all going to be things that are going to be accessible to you on the chat or on the bulletin, and they'll be there for a while. The Alzheimer's Association and the Dementia Alliance. So, please do check those out. I also kind of want to give a shout out to support groups, because I think that for some people, in terms of caregiving support groups, I do hear feedback that some people will say, I don't want to hear somebody else's sad story. And I've run support groups for decades. So yes, sometimes there are some sad stories, but other times there are a lot of uplifting stories. And many times people will share tips. And I think that that's invaluable because, they will say, this is what happened to me. And you might say, wow, that's an issue that we have in our home as well. And I think it's really important. And again, Mary had talked about this, being part of a caregiver support group, you have this feeling that you're not alone. So even though you might not be able to change the outcome, knowing that there are people feeling the same way that you are can be really helpful. So I would look into some of these resources and check out what the HD community has to offer as well.
Great, thank you. Those are a lot of great resources and ideas. They will be on the HD Hive bulletin board, as well as I think everybody who is watching this right now has some expertise, and they can add their expertise to the bulletin board. Put your tips, put your tricks that have worked well for you, and that might help people as well. The next question is for Dr. Edmondson. What advice for dealing with a parent who won't be tested but shows many signs and symptoms and has a strong family history?
Well, you saved a good question and a difficult one because it's a difficult situation. I think it's important to understand the different levels of awareness that we have when facing problems. So you can be, completely open and understand all the facts, and things move, forward well when people are open and they communicate well. However, there are also times when everyone sort of deceives themselves, right? Like you say, oh, well, that last brownie I ate doesn't really matter. Like it's 0 calories because I'm not going to pay attention to it. So there are things that we all do that we know are not smart, but we sort of do them anyway because we just decide we're not going to pay attention to the consequences of it. Then there is denial, which is an unconscious protective self-defense mechanism, a defense mechanism, sort of when you look at it psychologically. So people are keeping out of their awareness information that's too hot to handle, that's emotionally too painful for them to handle in their current state. So it's actually a defense mechanism that's unconscious, and most people aren't actually aware of denial. And then there's biological denial or anagnosia, which is a symptom of not only Huntington's disease, but several neurologic diseases where people lack awareness of a symptom or a behavior. Completely out of their awareness. For example, I gave an example earlier about somebody who told me that they didn't know they had chorea until they looked in the mirror. And so the person who asked this question is saying, I have a parent who clearly has Huntington's disease. What can I do about that? And so by definition, that person's parent is unaware that they have movement. They are unaware that they are not picking up on social cues, or that they've got cognitive slowing, or that their judgment is impaired. The whole host of all the symptoms that people have with HD. So I think it's important to recognize that this is not willful behavior. It's not childish. It's not planned. It is an actual lack of perception. With that in mind, there's a couple of things that I would suggest that the person that's having this problem, meaning their problem is that their parent is unaware that they have Huntington's disease, and that may have several consequences for them. That may put them in limbo, like, do I need to get tested? Does my parent actually have Huntington's disease, or could it be something else? And do I, how much, what is going to be my next action, my next step in my own life? And I think it's important to separate what's a problem for your parents and what's a problem for yourself, because the only person that you can really manage really is yourself. So If, however, that person is creating problems around themselves for the whole family and family dynamics are a mess, the first thing I would suggest is don't call it Huntington's disease. Call attention to the fact it's that what the problem is. You know, Dad, the police have pulled you over twice now for drunk driving. Why do you think that is? Or you address the emotions associated with that problem. Like, I see that you're really upset about the fact you can't do X. Is there something I can help you to do that? And so you solve the problem and you address the emotion without calling it Huntington's disease. And that might help you get a little bit further in finding solutions. Again, let's go back to this point about you are the person that's having problems. So if you are, go see a counselor, go see a genetic counselor, go call a social worker at a HDSA Center of Excellence, call our social workers at HD Reach, you know, and discuss what are the things that are the problems for you and what you need to do to solve them for yourself. Another thing that I've done in the past is that if somebody trusts their primary care doctor and they're less inclined to go see a psychiatrist or a neurologist, and they go for some sort of routine health care, you can ask the HD Reach social workers to contact that provider, get them up to date with the information that we know about that person. And, you know, if we have the permission of the person who's reporting it to us. And then, you know, without mentioning any names, say, you know, we know you have a patient who has Huntington's, let us give you some resources, and this is a medication that might be helpful for the symptoms that we know that person is dealing with. The last is to remove access. If somebody is driving and they're unsafe because they don't recognize that they have Huntington's, dismantle the car. You know, it's been wrecked, take it away. Begin to work on a transportation plan so that people don't have to depend upon the family car. Just remove access to the problem behavior. Remember, however, whatever you decide to do, you did not cause this behavior. It is not your fault that somebody is behaving this way. These are behaviors associated with Huntington's disease, and you are not the problem. You are the solution.
Thank you, Mary. You gave a lot of information, and I think that will help a lot of people. Dr. Sollmon, we have actually a lot of questions left, so I'm hoping we can answer these questions as quickly as possible so that we can get to as many of them as possible. So Dr. Sollmon, this next one is for you. Can you feel Huntington's in your body before you are diagnosed, even when you are in your teens?
That's a great question. And I think that you have to think about what the motivations are that might bring up that question in a youngster. So one is concern that they are going to develop Huntington's disease. Maybe they've already been tested when they were 18, or maybe they have a very strong family history, and so they're concerned about it. And what I want you to know is that being aware of the possibility of a symptom makes you find that symptom. And that's true for so many conditions. So there is a really great risk that you would tune into your body and think about things that are normal sensations or experiences, normal shakiness in different situations, and misattribute that to Huntington's disease. And that's a dangerous situation to be in because when you assume that you have the disease, if you haven't been tested, you can get depressed and you can start to feel helpless and hopeless and all sorts of other things. And so that's really where I want to keep the focus of the question. Certainly, you know, if you feel that you really do have Huntington's disease, then that's something that you should talk to one of the social workers about, and your family as well.
Great, thank you for that. Dr. Testa, we have a question. When a person with HD is unable to speak, mostly unable to walk, and unable to make any type of physical response to a question, is that person understanding what is being said to them?
Yeah, I have that written question. Thank you for repeating it. I think that I just want to speak really briefly to my own experience. My mom is the eldest of 8, and one of her brothers had a very severe birth injury. Um, and he's still living now. He's in his late 60s. But he, at best, as a young adult, could walk around with some guidance, participate in his basic stuff, like helping get himself dressed. And he would often just sit and rock, and it would seem like he wasn't really participating. Oh, goodness. Well, hope I was still talking. So I really grew up with the whole family just making the assumption that he could hear us and was ingesting what was going on. And when I was really small, I thought that that was fairly silly, and really grilled my parents about it. And their attitude was, well, maybe he's not really hearing or paying attention to anything that we're saying or doing, but if we treat him like he is in the room, then that influences our behavior, that influences our body posture, that influences how we move around the room, that influences what we say to each other, that influences our internal feelings about him and about each other. And it keeps us grounded. And maybe the only thing he's noticing is kind of the overall atmosphere in the room. Maybe, you know, all he's noticing is kind of how people feel when they're approaching him. And I've always thought that that was a lovely way to conceptualize it. If we really don't know how much they're ingesting, maybe it's little to nothing, and maybe it's everything. Just interacting as if they're there keeps your own internal space really grounded and helps with all of those unconscious cues towards that person and towards each other that we don't even realize that we're driving with whatever our internal monologue is or whatever our behavior is.
Thank you for that. And I know we're just about out of time, but I'm going to try to extend this for just 2 more minutes and just ask 1 or 2 more questions. So Dr. Bonnie, can you tell us where can you get anonymous HD gene testing?
Yeah, I think the short answer is it's definitely available. It's even available right here with HT Reach. If you live in North Carolina, South Carolina, or Virginia, or if you're willing to come to one of those states for an evaluation and results, HT Reach now has an at-risk decision path and genetic testing path. So I think it's worth picking up the phone and giving us a call or checking us out on the web in terms of these paths that we have to offer. Certainly, there are some testing centers. HDSA has testing centers that do offer anonymous testing. So again, it is really important to just pick up the phone and ask questions. If they can't tell you, if the local centers aren't able to offer that, ask them if perhaps. And definitely last, even if you are in a state that you can't get to us, you might want to just give HD Reach a call. We're always going to answer those questions for you. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for giving that. And yes, HD Reach will be a resource for you. If HD Reach doesn't have the right program for you, they can help match you up with the right program for genetic testing. And Dr. Edmondson, I'm going to ask you the last question of the day. People want to know, are there any new studies or drugs for an asymptomatic HD patient?
Oh, I wish there was. So I guess there are a couple. One of them is Enroll HD, which means that you can go into an observational clinical study at any time in your life, and you will see an HD expert every single year. They will do genetic testing, but they won't reveal the results of that to you. You, from your point of view, what you can get out of it is that you go see an expert, you have an opportunity to check them out when you're well and healthy, and you can decide, well, I kind of like that person, I don't like that person, or, I really love the clinical trials coordinator, who you're going to spend a lot of time with, and you can make a connection at a center and know that you have a place to go, and that's invaluable. And Claudia, I'd be real interested to know how often you are asked by an enrolled participant who, for whatever reason, looks at you and says, "So, Dr. Testa, do I have Huntington's disease this time?" What do you guys say?
That used to be a lot more common. I guess more in the Pharos and Predict studies, which are both closed. I don't get that as much in Enroll. Um, and I think it's partially because, unlike those studies in Enroll, we're not blinded to people's status. They're not blinded to their status. And so you can have an open conversation. I'll usually say, well, let's talk about that. I can give you a short answer now, but I think it'd be a really good idea for you to come into clinic so we can have as long a conversation as you need. And I'll often want to know why they're asking. Sometimes it's because they're noticing symptoms, but other times it's because they read up on a clinical trial and they're like, well, obviously I can't join this clinical trial unless I'm diagnosed with Huntington's disease. Let's find that out. So there's a lot of different reasons for people to ask that. It just doesn't happen as often as it did in the prior studies, and I'm not sure. I'm not completely sure why.
And if I could, I would love to add to this question, because I think the spirit of what motivated the question was trying to understand if there are things that a person can do to slow down the progression of their Huntington's disease, assuming that they might have it. And what we would say is anything that you can do to protect your brain and to keep your brain healthy, sleeping well, avoiding alcohol, which does cause neurodegeneration for all types of people, regardless of your genetic status, avoiding tobacco, keeping your stroke risk factors low by eating a healthy diet that's low in sugar and saturated fat, and exercise and stay hydrated. All of those things are really important. And lastly, also, protecting your mental health, because that does have an interaction with the structure and function of the brain as well. So seeking guidance, counseling, exercise, medication if you have anxiety or depression or any other symptoms. I think those are all really healthy and helpful things that people can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. We often joke about how in clinic about how aggravating it is that all those things that we all struggle to motivate ourselves to do are the things that we really ought to be doing, because they are the things that truly make a difference, whether that's getting in the exercise or getting in the sleep, watching those stroke risk factors. In these trying times, figuring out your safe social connections. I was just so delighted to be invited to this Hive meeting because it's not ideal to be sitting here nearly in my front hallway instead of physically with you guys, but it's still a nice connection.
Thank you all so much for all of your comments. I think, I want to commend all of the participants who are here, because I think what they are doing right now by listening to all of you experts is a great way to help themselves live well with HD. And I also think it shows how many experts there really are out in this field that are available and that can help you live well with HD. And I'm so grateful that all of you are here today. I just want to sincerely thank Dr. Testa, Dr. Edmondson, Dr. Hennig-Trestman, and Dr. Sollmon for your time and your wisdom and your dedication to the families who are impacted by HD. You each play an important role in helping families live well with HD, and we really thank you for being in the Hive with us today. And I think it's a great way to process what we've all learned here today, and also to inspire your creative spirit, is through art therapy. So if you'll stay tuned in just a moment, we have a great art therapy session with with Sarah Anacleto, who will be teaching us all a little bit about how to be fun and creative and connect to ourselves. And we also hope you'll share your art on the HD Reach conference website. So thank you again for being here to my panel, and we'll talk to everybody again soon.